I own 3 properties. 2 of them are rented out full-time, and the third is my primary residence in Montreal. The story I'm about to tell didn't happen where I live, but at a small rental property I own in Wakefield, Quebec. It's a quiet place, surrounded by dense woods, advertised specifically as a cozy getaway for couples looking to disconnect for a few days. It's a 2-bedroom house, but it's small, so I usually feel more comfortable renting it to couples rather than groups. Every once in a while, though, I'll get a booking from a larger group. Those are the guests I tend to worry about. Not because they're dangerous, but because they're careless. After big groups stay, I don't trust the cleaning service alone. I always make the drive out myself to make sure nothing was damaged, stolen, or broken. It's about a 2-hour drive, and when I go out there, I usually stay the night. This particular weekend, a group of 4 had stayed at the house. They checked out 2 days before I arrived, and it had snowed the day after they left. More snow was forecasted for that night. I texted my nearest neighbor to let him know I'd be in the area. He owns the house downhill from mine, but is almost never there. When I go up, I usually offer to bring him any mail or packages. He texted back quickly and asked if I could check his mailbox for something specific. I pulled into his driveway and walked over to the mailbox. Before I even opened it, I noticed footprints in the snow along the side of his house. They didn't come from the driveway. They came straight out of the woods, moved toward a window, then wrapped around toward the back. That immediately made me uneasy. I checked the mailbox. Just junk mail. Credit card offers. Nothing important. I texted him to let him know, then mentioned the footprints. He called me instead of texting back and asked me to follow them. I did. They circled the house and disappeared into the woods on the opposite side. As long as they didn't break in, he told me he didn't really care. I wish I could say that was the end of it. I drove the remaining minute up the hill to my property. The moment I stepped out of the car, I saw more footprints. A lot more. They were scattered all around the house. The guests had left days ago, and the snow should have covered anything they'd left behind. These prints were sharp and fresh. I told myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe someone had wandered through earlier that day. Still, the first thing I did was change the security code on the front door. Inside, the house was a mess. Dirty dishes stacked in the sink. Beer cans and soda bottles everywhere. Trash overflowing. It was annoying, but not unusual. I double-checked the closets, the bedrooms, and the storage areas. Nothing seemed missing. I started cleaning with music playing through a speaker. That's when I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was part of the music. But even over the sound, I could hear it clearly now. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate crunching in the snow. I turned off the music. The footsteps passed one of the windows and continued toward the backyard. My heart started pounding. No one should have been there. The house sits alone, surrounded by forest. Anyone walking around it would have had to come a long way on foot. I locked the front door and stood still, barely breathing. Whoever was had to know I was there. My car was parked right out front. For 20 minutes, I sat in the living room without making a sound. Eventually, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. Fresh footprints circled the house. I followed them around until they stopped abruptly near the back window, right below the air conditioning unit. From there, they didn't lead away. They just ended. I stared into the woods, suddenly overwhelmed by the feeling that I was being watched. I went back inside and didn't step out again for the rest of the day. I ordered food that took forever to arrive and spent the evening working remotely while snow continued to fall. By nightfall, the storm had intensified. The house felt smaller, quieter. Around 8, I put on a movie to distract myself. That's when I started hearing creaks above me. Not the usual settling sounds. These were heavier, slow, almost rhythmic. There's no attic. I try to rationalize it. Snow accumulating on the roof. Wind. Anything but what my instincts were screaming. After the movie, I went to bed. The snow tapping against the window was oddly calming, until I heard footsteps again. They passed directly outside my bedroom window. I sat upright in bed, frozen. The sound faded away, but I stayed like that for 20 minutes, waiting for a door handle to turn or glass to shatter. Nothing happened. Finally, I grabbed a baseball bat, put on my coat and shoes, and went outside. Another fresh trail of footprints circled the house. This time, they began directly beneath the air conditioning unit and led straight into the woods. That's when it clicked. Someone had been on my roof. They were using the AC unit to climb up and down. I went back inside and called the police. An officer arrived about 20 minutes later. Together, we walked around the property. He climbed onto the roof and confirmed it. There were footprints up there, clear ones. He was calm, reassuring. Told me he'd patrol the area and wouldn't be far if anything happened. I told him about my neighbor's house, too. After he left, I didn't sleep much. I left the next morning. The house was rented again a few days later. The guests reported nothing unusual. But every time it snows now, I think about the sound of footsteps overhead and how close someone came without ever making themselves seen. I was in 7th grade when this happened, which made it the first year my parents really trusted me to stay home alone at night. Up until then, I'd always had my older brother around, or a babysitter, or one of my parents working late while the other stayed home. But that winter, things changed. My parents had started going out together more often, and they decided I was old enough to handle being alone for a few hours. Most of the time, it was honestly great. I'd play video games without anyone telling me to get off, eat snacks I wasn't supposed to, and enjoy the quiet. Still, there was something different about being alone at night during winter. Snow made everything quieter, but also heavier, like the world was holding its breath. Our house had a large basement where my brother and I kept the gaming setup. It was unfinished with concrete floors and exposed beams, but it was big enough to feel like its own world. When we were younger, the basement terrified us. We used to flick the light off and sprint upstairs, convinced something was chasing us. By 7th grade, I told myself I was over that fear, but being down there alone at night still made me uneasy. That night, my parents had gone out for dinner. My brother Keith was staying over at a friend's house, so it was just me. It was snowing outside, the kind of steady snowfall that covered everything evenly. I remember sitting on the couch in the basement, controller in hand, completely focused on the game. Then there was a loud bang against the basement window. I flinched so hard I nearly dropped the controller. My heart started pounding instantly. The basement windows were narrow and high up, half buried in the snow outside. At first, I thought maybe a chunk of snow had fallen off the roof, or an icicle had broken loose. It was cloudy and windy, after all. I stood up and walked closer to the window. Snow dust clung to the glass, smeared like something had exploded against it. That should have been enough to convince me it was just snow. Then there was another bang. This one was harder, more deliberate. I froze, staring at the glass. More snow scattered across the window, like someone had packed it into a ball and thrown it directly at the house. My stomach dropped. Someone was outside. My first thought was that it had to be my brother. Maybe he'd come home early and thought it would be funny to scare me. That explanation made the most sense, and I clung to it because the alternative was too unsettling to consider. I went upstairs and headed to the back door, the one that led into the backyard. I opened the interior door and looked through the glass of the exterior door. The backyard was dark, lit only by the faint glow from a neighboring porch light reflecting off the snow. A brick wall blocked part of the view, so I couldn't see the entire yard. Without thinking it through, I opened the door and stepped outside in just my slides. The cold hit me instantly, snow biting at my feet. I stepped down into the yard and looked past the brick wall. That's when I saw someone crouching near the bushes by the back fence. They were clearly trying to hide. I called out my brother's name, my voice shaking more than I expected. The person didn't respond. They didn't move. I stood there, staring, my brain scrambling to convince itself that this was still some kind of prank. Then it hit me. That wasn't my brother. The shape was wrong. Too tall. Too still. I backed up slowly, my chest tightening, then turned and rushed back inside, slamming and locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the phone and called my mom. I asked her if Keith was supposed to be home. She said no, he was staying at his friend's place for the night. Right as she said that, another snowball hit the house. She heard it through the phone. I told her someone was in the backyard, throwing snowballs at the windows. She put me on speaker so my dad could hear too. My dad asked if it could just be kids messing around, but I told him I'd seen someone hiding in the bushes. They told me to go upstairs, lock myself in my room, and keep the lights off. My mom said she was calling the police and that they were already on their way home. I did exactly what they said. From my bedroom window, I could see part of the backyard. The snowfall had picked up, making everything blurry, but I could still see movement. The person was walking around the yard, stopping at windows, peering inside. Then I saw them knock on the kitchen window, the same one they'd hit earlier with a snowball. They thought I was still downstairs. That's when I realized this wasn't a prank. They weren't a kid. Even through the snow and darkness, I could tell they were too big. They wore a heavy jacket with a hood pulled up, their face hidden. I watched as they tried lifting the window, testing it, then moving on when it didn't budge. I sank down below the window, my heart racing so loudly I was afraid they could hear it. Then there was a crash against my bedroom window. A snowball hit the glass, followed by another. They'd seen me. I stayed silent, curled on the floor, listening to my own breathing. After a moment, the snowball stopped. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. The police arrived almost half an hour later. It felt like hours. I checked the doorbell camera feed before opening the door, just to be sure. A lone female officer stood outside, snow collecting on her shoulders. She searched the yard with a flashlight while I watched from inside. She checked the bushes, the shed, the fence line. When she came back, she said there were footprints everywhere, but no one was there anymore. She stayed with me until my parents got home. Nothing else happened that night. No more snowballs. No knocking. No sounds outside the windows. For years, I told myself it was probably just someone trying to scare me. A bored teenager. A drunk neighbor. Something harmless. But every winter, when snow falls quietly and the world goes still, I think about how methodical they were. How they checked windows. How they waited. And how they only left once they knew the police were coming. Whatever they wanted, I'm grateful I never found out. I still think about that weekend whenever I hear wind howling through trees in the winter. There are certain sounds that don't just scare you in the moment. They stay with you, embedding themselves into your memory. For me, it's the muffled silence of heavy snowfall, broken only by footsteps that shouldn't exist. This happened several years ago when I went with my girlfriend Trish, my longtime friend John, and his girlfriend Katie to the Colorado Rockies. John and I had known each other since high school and had always bonded over outdoor activities. Hiking, snowboarding, camping. If it involved being out in nature, we were into it. John's family owned a cabin deep in the mountains, and during the winter, it felt like the perfect escape from everything. We planned the trip specifically around a snowy forecast. Not a dangerous storm, just enough snow to make everything feel remote and peaceful. When we arrived, there was already a blanket of white covering the ground, untouched and quiet. The cabin sat alone in the woods, surrounded by towering trees and miles of wilderness. There were no neighboring cabins within sight, and barely any cell service once you got a short distance away. That first night was calm. We spent time in the hot tub, drinking wine while light snow flurries drifted down around us. The kind of night that makes you feel lucky to be alive. The snow was gentle then, almost comforting, like it was easing us into something bigger. The next morning, it was still snowing lightly. The forecast said heavier snow was coming later, but for now, it felt manageable. John fired up the quad his family kept in a large shed out back, and we spent hours riding around the property. The land was massive, with wide open areas perfect for drifting and narrow trails winding deep into the woods. By early afternoon, we went into town for lunch. When we came back, Trish and Katie were exhausted and decided to nap. John and I, restless as always, put on our hiking gear and decided to head up one of the trails that climbed the mountain beyond the property. We were both experienced hikers, and the climb didn't worry us. Still, hiking uphill through snow with heavy boots is no joke. After nearly an hour, we reached a high point that would have offered an incredible view if not for the fog. Everything around us was white. Sky, ground, trees blended into one endless blur. That's when the snow started coming down harder. At first, it was exciting. Thick flakes fell fast, the wind picking up just enough to sting our faces. I asked John, probably for the third time, if he was sure he knew the way back. He laughed it off and told me he'd been hiking these trails his whole life. On the way down, the snowfall turned into a full-blown blizzard. Visibility dropped fast, and the wind howled through the trees. We picked up our pace, eager to get back to the cabin before dark. That was when I heard it. a low, drawn-out sound behind us, almost like humming. At first, I thought it was the wind doing something strange between the trees, but it had a rhythm to it. I stopped and asked John if he heard that. He said no. We stood there in silence, snow piling up on our shoulders. It happened again. A deep, moaning hum, closer this time. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded human. We started moving faster. A few moments later, I heard footsteps behind us. Slow, deliberate, crunching softly into the snow. During a snowfall, everything becomes unnaturally quiet, which makes sounds like that stand out in a way that feels wrong. I told John to stop again, and we listened. The footsteps stopped when we stopped. That's when we knew something was following us. My phone suddenly vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw dozens of messages from Trish, all sent at once now that I briefly had signal. She was asking if it was John and me walking around outside the cabin. She said they were scared and didn't want to go outside. My stomach dropped. I tried to reply, but the message wouldn't send. I tried calling. No signal again. I told John what the text said, and without saying another word, we started running. Behind us, the humming returned, louder now, joined by footsteps that sped up when we did. Whatever was back, there was keeping pace with us, even in the deep snow. My lungs burned as we pushed ourselves downhill, slipping and stumbling through the storm. Finally, we saw the glow of the cabin lights through the trees. We reached the cabin and banged on the door until the girls let us in. The moment we stepped inside, Trish and Katie started talking at the same time. They told us they'd seen two people walking around outside about 10 minutes earlier. One of them had stopped at the window and looked inside. John immediately went to his father's room and came back with a gun. All the blinds were shut, and the cabin felt suddenly smaller, tighter. We still had to go out for dinner, so after waiting a while, John and I stepped outside with the gun, scanning the area. We didn't see anyone, and eventually we got everyone into the truck and went to a nearby diner. That night, we skipped the hot tub and watched a movie instead. About halfway through, there was a loud, aggressive knock at the door. Everyone froze. John grabbed the gun. The knock came again, just as forceful. John whispered, asking if he should threaten whoever it was. I told him no. We stayed silent, barely breathing. There was no third knock. We waited like that for half an hour before deciding to sleep in the living room, just in case. None of us slept much. Every sound made my heart race. The next morning, the storm had passed. Fresh snow covered everything. We packed up quickly, eager to leave. As we stepped outside, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were no footprints anywhere around the cabin. Not from the night before. Not near the windows. Not by the door. Nothing. The snow was smooth and untouched, like no one had ever been there at all. We left without saying much. To this day, I don't know who or what was following us in that storm. But sometimes I wonder if the reason there were no footprints is because whatever was never needed them in the first place.